If you've been following video game news over the past several years, you'll no doubt know about Microsoft's highly secretive spy game Perfect Dark, the very first project from their homegrown studio, The Initiative. But in a shocking yet somewhat predictable twist, Microsoft has not only canceled Perfect Dark outright, they've decided to shutter The Initiative as well. How exactly did something with so much promise and potential circle the drain for so long? The limited narrative that escaped The Initiative was dismissed by Microsoft PR for years, but now appears to have been validated. And that's before we even talk about what the heck Perfect Dark even was, and why I personally suspect that became their very first ill-fated project. While reviewing the official materials produced by Microsoft, I found several interviews hyping up the Initiative's foundation and a couple Perfect Dark teasers. But one of the most valuable resources is a casual interview from industry veteran Dean Takahashi and the Initiative's founder, Darrell Gallagher, on GamesBeat in June of 2018. At this time, Gallagher was a rising star within the industry, moving from the top position at Crystal Dynamics to as senior vice president at Activision before landing at Microsoft in a handful of years. But it appears Mr. Gallagher wasn't prepared for the direct candor of Mr. Takahashi's no-nonsense interview style. Quote, "What gives you the confidence that they don't just want to start something up, see if it works, and shut it down if it doesn't?" Gallagher, "That's absolutely not. I feel we have great confidence and momentum. Obviously, you've seen what was announced. When you look at everything collectively, the momentum we have right now is really strong. The platform is really strong. The tools and tech, the support is really strong. From my standpoint, all the pieces are there to go make the next groundbreaking great gaming experience for the audience. I couldn't be better set up than having that blank canvas with all the brushes and tools and being encouraged to go paint." End quote. And to Mr. Gallagher's credit, he had plenty of reasons to be optimistic, with the full backing of Microsoft and a new studio and developer hotbed, Santa Monica, California, including heavy hitters like Treyarch and Sony's renowned Santa Monica Studios. While the growing studio stayed quiet, internally, they had already selected their debut project, the long-dormant first-person shooter franchise Perfect Dark. Now, at the risk of injecting a history lesson here, I think many younger players might have no connection whatsoever to Perfect Dark, and even older players often forget its significance at that time. This was Rare's follow-up to 007 GoldenEye, one of the most culturally significant video games of the 1990s. Meanwhile, Perfect Dark ballooned development so far, the game ultimately required the Nintendo 64 RAM Pack accessory to access the majority of its features. But make no mistake, this was a remarkably successful feature creep, with fans and critics praising the game for super serving single-player and multiplayer, with transforming weapons and multiple campaign variations, including a mode where local players could progressively fight Joanna Dark by taking control of NPC enemies. But when it returned in 2005 with Perfect Dark Zero, a lot had changed in the first-person shooter console space. Halo, Timesplitters, and Killzone were following the modern snug dual-stick controls. Perfect Dark Zero felt floaty, with the overly shiny veneer of assets and animations crammed together for an Xbox 360 launch title. And so the franchise would sit there for the next 13 years. According to the Initiative developer interviews, Perfect Dark was selected because of the studio's shared affection for spy fiction and espionage, but they wouldn't be beholden to the past. Giving a focus on parkour and physicality, the team expressed an interest in recreating the aggressive movement as seen in GoPro and handheld videos, giving the player tangible obstacles and matter. The story would also be given a complete makeover, taking place after a mass casualty eco-disaster which pushes humanity to near extinction for the corporation's rebuilt society into its next great phase, emphasizing that the vast majority of humans would feel fulfilled, happy, and optimistic about their future. But in a twist, much like the first game, protagonist Diana would stumble upon a secret so great it would instantly reshape her understanding of the universe and the future of the Earth. Sadly, we never got a good look at what that could be, but this sole gameplay trailer did give players insights into how the various puzzles and gadgets would function, including voice recording to gain access to locked doors, and Joanna's ability to quickly switch from different visual readings to locate her next objective. It looked to be a highly produced blockbuster video game, but behind the scenes it was anything but. In September of 2021, Microsoft announced developer Crystal Dynamics would also be developing Perfect Dark, which caused some confusion. After all, 3 years earlier, the Initiative was on a hiring spree and promoting itself as a quadruple-A studio, one more than a triple-A studio. It was a vague but ambitious turn of phrase, but now they were pulling in outside sources to help support their very first project. Frankly, it didn't make a lot of sense. Just as concerning, the developer still wasn't sure if it would be first person or third person. And over the years, video game news outlet Video Game Chronicle followed the Initiative's collective LinkedIn accounts to better understand the current state of development, and their reporting highlighted numerous high-profile employees walking away from positions of power, nearing 50 departures in a handful of months. Mr. Gallagher explained the reasons were complicated, but partially influenced by the upheaval of a global pandemic. However, in a landmark report published on IGN, Rebekah Valentine gave a detailed account of Perfect Dark's labored development. As described by several anonymous sources, quote, "It was not that we didn't know what we wanted, it was that we kept making things that weren't what we wanted. We do it over and over again. Levels we had when I left weren't the same ones we had 3 months prior, or 3 months prior. I don't know why people just kept hitting the reset button. That was definitely contributing to the feeling that we weren't making any progress. People kept starting over." More surprising was the discovery that Crystal Dynamics were actually the second support developer, with certain Affinity being dismissed after the first few years. And yet, according to Miss Valentine's sources, hardly any progress had been made, with Crystal Dynamics employees describing limited assets and haphazard stages despite multiple passes. This slow development was only worsened with more studios involved, due to spotty communication between parties, with one developer saying they hardly did any work over the span of 9 months, and things didn't look to be picking up, with Perfect Dark's progress being scrapped in favor of adopting Unreal Engine 5. By 2022, Perfect Dark was 4 years into development, with high turnover and nothing to show for it. But in public, Microsoft stayed positive, with the head of Xbox Studios, Matt Booty, dismissing concerns, explaining the complexities of starting a new studio, and reassuring journalists that Perfect Dark had hit its stride. Meanwhile, the developers felt lost, uncertain what or why any one thing was being done, often resorting to sharing their work as standalone assets and ideas. And this is where Mrs. Valentine's report and Mr. Takahashi's interview, despite being years apart, point to an overly open development culture. Quote, "Gallagher, there's a bit of a black box and a dark art around game development. How it comes about. I wanted to get your opinion and your thoughts on opening that up and having a two-way relationship with people like yourself or an audience that can participate. Outside of the release of a game, I think the development of a game is really interesting. When I say think differently, how we challenge expectations and break new ground, it's not just in the types of games that we make or what we intend to do in our ambitions, it's how we make it. That's an interesting conversation point. How do we bring people alongside? How open are we about the difficulties and the challenges we face day-to-day in development?" End quote. And according to IGN's report, the desire to bounce ideas off each other wasn't conducive to maintaining any sort of progress. Outside developers were expecting to follow the traditional route of aiding previously approved work. This added freedom may have sounded like a promising new way to develop a video game, but the initiative's corporate culture was still in development. Meanwhile, studios like Crystal Dynamics were seeing waves of layoffs, while still reassuring that Perfect Dark's development would remain unaffected. Even the gameplay trailer we've been reviewing only debuted last year in June of 2024. But on July 2nd, 2025, a full 7 years after Mr. Takahashi asked that pointed question, Matt Booty would announce the end of Perfect Dark's development and the immediate closure of the initiative. So where did it all go wrong? Well, by the sound of it, the initiative never had the strong vision required for leadership in game development. By leaving multiple departments to their own devices, they worked individually rather than as a collective. And honestly, it sounds like the most experienced developers knew this was a bad idea, walking away from the project to rejoin their prior studios. But it should also be noted how unusual the idea of a blockbuster Perfect Dark reboot was to begin with. And I say that as a major fan of the series with a strong sense of nostalgia. But even I couldn't understand it. Or at least not until replaying portions of Perfect Dark for this video. See, Perfect Dark launched in May of 2000, months after Sony began rolling out the dominant console of the next generation, the PlayStation 2. And as such, Perfect Dark was deeply appreciated by those who played it, mostly a hardcore crowd who would shortly move on to the GameCube and Xbox. It was the perfect example of quick hit hype, with perfect scores and good sales in such a small time frame. Over time, it never seemed to devalue. A crystallized vision of what the future of video games could be, but ultimately was sidestepped by more popular designs. And as unsatisfying as it might be for us fans, Microsoft's acquisitions have immediately produced more successful content than the initiative. What could this parkour FPS game do that wasn't already being addressed by Call of Duty, or Overwatch, or Halo, or Doom, or Wolfenstein? And even if you're a Rare fan like myself, even that studio left Perfect Dark in the dust a long time ago for new ideas like Sea of Thieves. The original Perfect Dark was a disaster by most accounts, losing a large portion of their staff during development, and yet it succeeded by cohesively merging disparate ideas into a singular vision. But consider this. We've watched the first-person shooter evolve drastically over the past 25 years, with fans growing up to make their own kind of FPS games with plenty of nostalgia for the affectionately titled boomer shooters. But Perfect Dark and of GoldenEye's unique objective-based gameplay hardly exists in 2025. For fans like me, Perfect Dark was everything it needed to be. It's impossible to replicate, let alone across multiple studios, including one that's being built in tandem. Rare had an advantage in their culture of a decade plus in development. Sensibilities formed, parallel thinking occurred, creators worked to each other's creations, in a somewhat insular fashion. Meanwhile, the initiative left employees in the office without work for months at a time and little communication. The question now turns from why was it cancelled to how much did they ever really get done in the first place? We might never know. Anyway, that's gonna do it for this video. What did you think of Perfect Dark and the Perfect Dark Reboot? Chat back in the comments below. Keep clicking around here at GameRant, and we'll see you next time. Thanks everybody!